Title: I came home early to find my wife in bed with another man. What I did next. Left them. Speechless and begging, let's start the story. It was a typical Wednesday morning in the bustling city of New York, where life moved fast, and so did the people. James Carter. A 34-year-old marketing executive known for his dedication and sharp mind had started his day like any other. He sipped his black coffee while scrolling through his emails, ready to tackle the usual chaos of corporate life. James was the kind of man who believed in loyalty and hard work, values he held dear not just in his career but also in his marriage too. Rachel Carter, a freelance graphic designer. To anyone looking in from the outside, their relationship seemed picture-perfect. A loving husband, a talented wife, and a cozy apartment overlooking the Brooklyn skyline. Little did James know that day was about to take a sharp, unexpected turn. Around noon, a client canceled an important meeting, leaving James with an unusually free afternoon. Excited at the rare opportunity to surprise Rachel, he decided to head home early. The thought of spending some unexpected quality time with her brought a rare smile to his face as he stepped into his car and navigated through the busy streets of Manhattan. But as he approached their apartment door, an unsettling silence greeted him, a silence that would soon change his life forever. Ethan Carter's life with Olivia had always appeared flawless to anyone looking from the outside. They were the quintessential Chicago couple, young, successful, and deeply in love, or so Ethan thought. Their marriage was built on trust, or at least that's what Ethan believed during their years together. Weekends at the Lake Michigan shoreline, late-night takeouts from their favorite West Loop diners, and shared dreams of starting a family made their bond seem unbreakable. But cracks began to form in this perfect picture. It started small, unexplained late-night phone calls where Olivia claimed it was work, or business trips to San Francisco that seemed oddly timed. Her once warm and affectionate demeanor turned cold, almost distant. The woman who used to laugh at Ethan's jokes during their morning coffee dates at the Bookseller Cafe now seemed preoccupied, her mind elsewhere. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. At first, he dismissed his suspicions as paranoia, chalking it up to work stress or the natural ebb and flow of marriage. But the signs became harder to ignore. One evening, while Olivia was in the shower, Ethan's suspicions reached a breaking point. Her phone, left unattended on the kitchen counter, buzzed with a message that caught his attention. It was from a contact saved as Maya, but the message read, "Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you." Ethan's stomach dropped. Maya wasn't a coworker or a friend. Ethan knew every name in Olivia's close circle. His hands trembled as he scrolled further and discovered an entire thread of messages exchanged over the past few weeks. The texts left no room for doubt. Olivia was cheating on him. The discovery hit Ethan like a freight train, leaving him gutted. Anger surged through him, but so did heartbreak, a profound sense of betrayal by the woman he had vowed to spend his life with. Yet in the midst of the emotional turmoil, something within Ethan shifted. He wasn't going to let himself be the victim of their deceit. As he closed her phone and put it back in its place, he knew one thing for sure. He needed answers. And more importantly, he needed a plan. The seeds of Ethan's revenge were planted that night, growing steadily as he connected the dots and pieced together the extent of Olivia's betrayal. What started as heartbreak was beginning to transform into cold, calculated resolve. James stepped into the apartment, expecting to hear the familiar hum of Rachel's favorite playlist or the clinking of dishes from the kitchen. Instead, he was met with an eerie silence that immediately sent a chill down his spine. Something felt off. His usually warm and inviting home now carried an unsettling stillness, as though it were holding its breath. Setting his briefcase down quietly, James called out Rachel's name, his voice echoing in the emptiness. There was no response. As he moved deeper into the apartment, his heartbeat quickened. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. From inside, he could hear faint, muffled sounds, barely audible but enough to stir suspicion. Each step closer felt heavier, the air thick with tension. James pushed the door open slowly, and what he saw next froze him in place. There, in the bed he had shared with his wife for the past 6 years, lay Rachel entwined with another man. For a moment, time seemed to stop. James stood in stunned silence, his mind racing to make sense of the betrayal unfolding before his eyes. The woman he had loved and trusted completely had shattered the very foundation of their life together. Waves of emotions hit him all at once: shock, anger, heartbreak, and an unbearable sense of grief. His legs felt weak, but he forced himself to stay rooted, his mind struggling to process the scene that had just upended his world. James didn't realize when his grip on the door tightened, but the sound of it slamming open startled the pair on the bed. Rachel gasped, scrambling to cover herself with the sheets, while the man beside her sat frozen, his face a mixture of panic and dread. The room, which had once been James's sanctuary, was now a battlefield, and his presence alone had turned it into a scene of utter chaos. James's voice broke the tense silence, low and trembling with raw emotion. "Is this what my love and trust mean to you, Rachel?" His words cut through the air like shards of glass, exposing the weight of his heartbreak and the depth of his anger. Rachel stuttered. "James, this isn't what it looks like." But her trembling voice only added to her guilt. The man, clearly younger and visibly terrified, attempted to speak, but James silenced him with a piercing glare. "You don't get to explain," James spat, his voice now sharp and unrelenting. "In our bed? In my home? Do you even understand what you've destroyed?" His words were not loud, but the fury behind them left Rachel and her lover visibly shaken. For a moment, the room was charged with emotions: James's heartbreak and betrayal against Rachel's panic-stricken guilt and her partner's sheer cowardice. Both of them sat speechless, their shame palpable in the room. James's composure, though trembling under the weight of his emotions, was more terrifying than any outburst could have been. The confrontation was brief but devastating, leaving Rachel and her lover drowning in their own regret as James stepped back, his next move unpredictable but undoubtedly decisive. The tension in the room was suffocating. James stood there, his heart pounding in his chest, staring at the two people who had shattered his trust. But instead of giving in to rage or engaging in a dramatic outburst, he did something neither Rachel nor her lover expected. He took a deep breath and stepped back. The quiet resolve in his demeanor was far more unsettling than any display of anger could have been. James's voice, steady but laced with disappointment, broke the silence. "I won't stoop to your level, Rachel. You've already destroyed enough today." His words carried a calm authority that left them stunned, unsure of what he might do next. For a moment he looked around the bedroom, taking in every painful detail: the bed they'd once shared, now tainted, the man who didn't even have the courage to meet his eyes, and Rachel, desperately clinging to the sheets, as though they could shield her from her own guilt. Then, James delivered the words that would haunt them both. "This house is no longer yours to feel safe in. You can have your moment, but this life, this trust, it's gone." Without raising his voice or resorting to insults, he turned and walked out of the room, his every step filled with dignity and purpose. His unexpected calmness left Rachel and her lover reeling, their panic and regret amplified by his composure. This move wasn't just about leaving the room. It was about reclaiming his power. James's decision to walk away, rather than engaging in chaos, showed a level of strength and self-control that neither of them had anticipated. It wasn't the reaction they were prepared for, and it left them speechless, grappling with the weight of their actions and the depth of the betrayal. As James stepped out of the apartment, the cold air of the Brooklyn streets hit him like a wave of clarity. The weight of betrayal lingered heavily on his chest, but he kept walking, refusing to let his emotions control him. He found himself on a park bench near the river, staring at the water as he processed everything. Anger, sorrow, and confusion swirled within him, but amidst it all, there was a quiet resolve to not let this moment define him. Instead of retreating into despair, James reached out to his closest friend, Michael, sharing the heartbreaking truth. Michael listened without judgment, offering words of support and reminding James of his own strength and worth. For the first time that day, James felt a small flicker of relief. Back at the apartment, Rachel was a wreck. The reality of her actions crashed down on her like a tidal wave. She paced the room, tears streaming down her face, while the man she had chosen to betray James with slipped out, unwilling to face the consequences. Rachel tried calling James, leaving tearful voicemails begging for forgiveness, but her words went unanswered. The silence from James was deafening, forcing her to sit with her own guilt. She realized what she had destroyed: a loyal, kind husband who had always prioritized her happiness. Days turned into weeks, and Rachel's regret deepened with every moment of James's absence. She sent messages, apologizing and asking for another chance, but James had already begun a journey of healing. Instead of responding to her pleas, he focused on rebuilding his life, embracing self-growth, and regaining his dignity. While Rachel was consumed by guilt, James found solace in new routines. Morning runs along the Manhattan skyline, reconnecting with old friends, and diving into work with a renewed sense of purpose. The contrast was striking. Rachel, burdened by shame and regret, and James, rising above the ashes of betrayal with resilience and grace. Her desperation only highlighted his strength, showing that while she sought redemption, James had already found something far more valuable: his self-respect and a fresh start. After weeks of silence, Rachel finally received the message she had been dreading but knew was inevitable. James had requested to meet, not at their apartment, but at a quiet coffee shop in Soho, a neutral space far removed from the memories of their shared life. As she sat nervously clutching her coffee cup, James walked in with an air of calm and quiet strength. He looked different, more composed, more sure of himself. Rachel's heart sank, knowing she was about to face the consequences of her betrayal. James began, his tone steady but firm. "Rachel, I've had time to think, to reflect on everything that happened. I won't deny the pain you caused me, but I won't let it define me either. What we had is gone, and there's no rebuilding what you chose to break." His words were final, yet they carried no malice, only a sense of closure. Rachel tried to plead, tears streaming down her face as she begged for one last chance, but James shook his head gently. "This isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about me choosing myself for once." Walking away from Rachel wasn't easy, but it was necessary. James knew that staying in a broken relationship would only compromise his self-worth, and he refused to sacrifice his dignity for someone who had taken it for granted. Instead of wallowing in the past, he embraced the future with open arms. He moved into a new apartment in Williamsburg, a space that symbolized a fresh start. Each day he focused on personal growth, whether it was pursuing hobbies he'd neglected, excelling at work, or simply enjoying the peace of being on his own. The moral of James's journey was clear. No matter how much you love someone, your self-respect must always come first. Betrayal may leave scars, but it also paves the way for strength, independence, and a renewed sense of purpose. James's story wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about rediscovering himself and proving that dignity and self-worth are the most valuable things one can hold on to. As he watched the New York skyline glitter under the evening sky, James felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He hadn't just survived betrayal, he had grown beyond it. As James stood on the rooftop of his new apartment, gazing out at the glittering Manhattan skyline, he felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. The weight of betrayal, which had once crushed him, now felt like a distant memory. He thought back to the day he had walked out of that room, leaving Rachel and her regret behind, and he realized how far he had come since then. The pain, though sharp at first, had taught him the most important lesson of all. Self-respect is not negotiable, no matter how deep the love or how long the history. Rachel's apologies, her desperate attempts to make amends, no longer haunted him. They were now just echoes of a past life, a life he had left behind to embrace something greater, his independence, his dignity, and his renewed sense of purpose. James had chosen himself, and that decision had opened doors to a future filled with promise and peace. With the cool night breeze brushing against his face, James let out a deep breath and smiled.